Welcome to Wrestling with Heart, a podcast looking at pro wrestlers giving back to their community. Join me, Stanley Carr, as I interview wrestling's hottest names who use their platforms as entertainers to raise awareness and do community service. Hello and welcome to another edition of Wrestling with Heart. This is the show where we talk with professional wrestlers and professional wrestling personalities about their lives in and outside of the ring, as well as doing acts of charity work, community service, volunteering, and spreading positivity. We're always about the positive vibes here on the show, and with me today, I've got a very special guest. She is a pro wrestling journalist, content creator, interviewer, and she is all over social media, so we'll talk about the cool things that she is doing throughout the podcast. Pleased to welcome the one, the only Xenia. Welcome to Wrestling with Heart.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's my pleasure. So, talk to me about your childhood. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Russia. I grew up pretty much all over Europe, but mostly Russia. I'm part Russian, part Romanian. But I did also spend a good chunk of my childhood in Spain, which is where I mostly reside right now. Um, I have nothing to complain about in terms of the privilege that I was lucky to have. I have a good family, I had a good upbringing, I had a good childhood, I had a good education, and I'm very thankful for that because I feel like that was part of what even pushed me towards creating anything at all, and towards being where I'm at, and towards having the skills that I have, and even speaking the language that I'm speaking into you right now.
Well, it's the cool thing about creating things is it all starts when you're young. Talk to me about some of like the first things you remember writing as a kid.
That's such a good question. I've never been asked something like that, but I'm glad that you asked because in terms of my like official content creator journey, right? I always say that I've been doing it for 7 years, but the real truth behind it is that I've been creating something for as long as I can remember. I've been writing poetry since I was 9 years old, I want to say, or 8 years old. I could never play music like a musical instrument until I was older, but I always liked to sing, and I would write like song lyrics, like or what I intended to be song lyrics, and I used to write stories. And a lot of people don't like mention that part of their biography, but I did used to write fan fiction. And I do think that it doesn't have to be something shameful, even though it can be cringy because for a lot of people, it's their first introduction to writing. It's their first step, right? And I'm definitely not proud of some things that I've written, but it's something that definitely, again, circling back to this, helped me learn English because I would write fan fiction in English as early as 12, 13 years old. Um, and yeah, definitely people tell me that I'm good at writing, and it never really strikes me as something that's one of the main things that I do because I don't write that much. I write on demand, I write whenever my journalist friends need a contribution for an article, or whenever there's an opinion piece, or whenever I need to write something for my media clients as a reminder or guide or anything like that. But I never think of myself as a person who writes. But now that you ask, I have been writing my entire life. Yeah.
Do you remember the first pieces of poetry or stories that you can recall that you remember writing about?
I don't remember anything by heart. I don't remember. I don't even remember my recent poetry by heart. I still write poetry, but at this point, I write it just very strictly for myself. It never escapes my drawer. I do sometimes post it on like a close friend story, so like maybe the biggest audience it will get is like 11 people. But no, I don't remember anything by heart. But I remember I had this like tiny little notebook that I would write everything in. And another fun fact, I've always had, still have a horrible, terrible handwriting, almost indistinguishable. So at this point, I think if I went back, a lot of the things I wouldn't even be able to read.
Well, the important thing is you have a dream, you've stuck with it for so long, you're passionate about what you do, and was wrestling something that you grew up watching as a kid? How did you get interested in pro wrestling?
Yes and no, because I feel like when I tell Americans that I started watching at 11 years old, it's nothing special. And a lot of people start watching earlier than that. And a lot of people have this experience of, say, like their dad bringing them to their first indie show when they're 5 years old. A lot of my American friends have like pictures of a famous wrestler who wasn't then famous, like holding them as a kid. Wasn't the experience for me. But for someone who's from Eastern Europe, starting at 11 was early. Because wrestling wasn't something that was ever mainstream in Eastern Europe. It still isn't. It's growing. It's a growing scene in Russia, in Romania as well. And I actually even made a mini documentary about wrestling in Romania, but the first ever wrestling school in Romania. It's on my channel. People can check it out on my Xenia did that YouTube channel. Um, but yeah, it was something I grew up with. I stumbled upon it accidentally. I was actually in England because my mom, who's a designer and artist, had worked there. She was designing a trophy for a fashion competition. And I was flipping through the channels in our hotel room and stumbled upon SmackDown at the time. And the rest is history. It was love at first sight.
Who are your favorites to watch growing up?
When I first started watching at 11 years old, I vividly remember seeing Kofi Kingston, and he was one of my first favorites. And I remember like tuning into WWE and hoping that he would have a match. I was so excited to see him wrestle. But as I like became a fan, some of my favorites who are still favorites were Edge. uh, for some reason, 12-year-old me had a crush on the this like disgusting heel Edge. She thought he was the coolest. The Miz as well. I did really like Randy Orton as well, and I still do. Yeah, like you said, it was a lot of star power back then. And for me, I think the period where I became more of a conscious fan and I began to delve deeper was more in the early 2010s, which a lot of people look back on as this kind of downhill era after ruthless aggression, right? Which,
PG
to
era.
an PG era, to an extent is true, but to me, just such a nostalgic time period that I love it, and I still rewatch some of the stuff from that time.
Yeah, it's always when you're a kid that's like the greatest era for
Yeah,
professional wrestling. It's always subjective.
true.
For others, it's the rock and wrestling era, some like the Attitude Era if you grew up in the Attitude Era, Ruthless Aggression era, PG era. It's very subjective to enjoy the wrestling that you really thought was the greatest was when you were a kid. And so there's never a better feeling in the world. But it's crazy now. I feel like we're in such a boom period. There is so much wrestling content out there now. It's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an amazing time to be a wrestling fan. There's something for everyone. There's so much variety, and with the help of social media, there's so many promotions and so much talent that can get that audience and can get that reach that couldn't previously. So absolutely, yeah. And we have access to wrestling from all over the world, and we just don't have enough hours in the day.
Do you recall the first wrestling event you went to?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, 1,000%. So it's funny because the first wrestling event that I ever bought a ticket to wasn't the first one that I went to. Because the first wrestling event that I ever bought a ticket to, about a year out, was WrestleMania 29,
Hmm.
which is a massive first thing of wrestling to acquire a ticket for. Because, like I said, I was living in Eastern Europe and I never really even thought that travel into the United States to see a wrestling show was an option. It never even really occurred to me because I wasn't working in wrestling. I wasn't making content at the time. I was just a fan, but I was a diehard fan. And at the time that WrestleMania 29 happened, I'd already been a fan for like 8 years, so it was a long time coming. But the first show that I actually went to, WWE happened to have a house show in Moscow, Russia before then. So I that was the first show I ever went to, and the first ever wrestling related event that I ever had any kind of live experience with. It was insane because it was the Miz's meet and greet. The Miz
Hmm.
being one of my absolute favorite wrestlers ever, and at the time he was my one favorite wrestler. Like, because at the time I only watched WWE. I wasn't mature in my wrestling journey, so he was he was the light of my life. He was my absolute favorite. And they were sending people places to do like PR and to do meet and greets where they had upcoming house shows. So when I saw the announcement on Twitter, I cried. I like collapsed on the carpet and cried. Got the ticket, and it was insanity. It was at the mall, just outside of Moscow, Russia, and the crowd. I don't think I since then I've been to so many wrestling shows, events, meet and greets, cons, everything. Since then, I don't think I've ever seen a bigger crowd for a meet and greet than that. It was insanity. People just walking all over each other, pushing each other, just sea of people. It was like smack in the middle of like the atrium of the mall, and it was just full. All you could see was heads. I don't know how I even ever got to the front. I think I like, I was kind of just pushing my way through because I felt like I needed more than other people. But then, like, I definitely cried at the security guard and I had been like, hey, this is so important to me. Can you please help me? And they did. Then I waited like another like good hour for sure in that line. And I think like coming up to the front, I looked a mess because I clearly had been crying. And a couple of people before I like was supposed to go to the front, I like caught his eye and I smiled, or I think I tried to smile maybe, and he was just like, but it's a great memory. I haven't talked about it in a while. It's really cool that you asked this, but it's yeah, it's a beautiful memory for sure.
There's no better feeling in the world than to meet your favorite wrestler, especially somebody that you've looked up to for so long. As someone who has also gone to so many wrestling shows and meet and greets and conventions, there's a lot of energy, as know when you go to these places because there's so many people there, like so many wrestlers
Yeah,
there. And Miz, definitely one of, in my opinion, probably one of the greatest heels of the modern era. Just his psychology
1000%.
and
Mm.
the way he carries himself on the mic and the way he carries himself just as a persona is
Yeah.
just unmatched.
And the way he carries himself at events outside of kayfabe, like the way he carries himself at talk shows, at TV appearances, radio appearances, like there's not a better person in WWE right now to send out into the world to do this. And Miz was a heel at the time. I think it was 2012 or 11, I want to say. And he was a heel, but the Russian crowd was all over him. They loved him for some reason. And I think, maybe it was for a reason that they sent him to do this, but maybe statistically Russians love Miz. I don't know. I don't know what that's about. But it was amazing. And like that wall had like a graffiti wall where, if any celebrities were doing events there, they would sign it. And they prepared like a WWE themed mural for him to sign, and he signed it. And it was a whole thing too. It was so cold outside. It was March. But in Moscow, it's really cold in March. Like it's winter in March, pretty much. And he was wearing a suit, and his translator was wearing like she was like such a stereotypical like Russian middle-aged woman. She was wearing a full fur coat, a fur like hat situation, and he was just wearing a suit. It was crazy. Like he like I think he asked them for a pumpkin spice latte from Starbucks. But fun fact, first of all, Starbucks in Moscow only appeared like in the early 2010s. And the first year we got pumpkin spice latte was not until like maybe 5 years ago from now. So it was not a thing. So they didn't know what he wanted. So they brought him like a slice of pie instead of a coffee. It was fun.
I think that's so cool that you're able to recall those memories forever ingrained. You always remember those first few memories that you
For
start going to
sure.
shows and events. I want to talk with you about your channel, how you got involved, started making content and videos. What made you decide to start putting together a YouTube channel?
It was just a combination of all factors, honestly, because first of all, I'd been a wrestling fan for a while, but then I'd also been a YouTube fan for a while. I'd always liked YouTube as a medium, and I've had, favorite YouTubers, and I'd had channels that I was following, and it was always something that in the back of my mind I wanted to do. But you know how sometimes we get these thoughts that like, oh yeah, like other people could do it, but maybe not me. Maybe, those cool people could do it, but not me. Um, And then at the time of me starting my channel, I was getting my bachelor's degree, and my bachelor's degree is in journalism and PR. And I was just kind of looking at all those aspects of my life, and I thought, hey, why don't I put the three together and give it a try? And when I started out, it was very much like traditional YouTuber. I didn't think I would work in wrestling. I didn't think I would work with wrestlers. I was just doing YouTuber stuff. I was doing reactions. I was doing a lot of wrestling figure unboxings. I haven't done one in ages, but I still love wrestling figures and I still collect wrestling figures. Um, and reactions, like try not to laugh challenges, like my top five this, my top five that, like this kind of stuff. But I was learning as I went, because I had zero previous experience with producing content, and I didn't know how to film, I didn't know how to do sound, I didn't know how to edit, and I had to teach myself to do everything. So some of those like early videos, especially me like watching it back, of how I talked, like that's just the cringiest thing that you can ever put in front of my eyes is my early videos. Because if you think I have an accent now, you should listen to me then. And I just had no idea how to, present, how to be in front of a camera. But I learned along the way, and I also look back at that period in my life with, with love, with excitement, with warmth. It was a fun time.
Yeah, it can be hard to go back and listen to your own voice at
Oh
times, and
yeah,
because you go back and go, "Wow, this is what I sounded like. This is what I was
it's
doing."
crazy, right?
But now
Yeah,
you just
whenever my friends want to like start creating content or want me to give them advice or to give them my perspective, I always tell them it's gonna be a curve of you absolutely hating how you sound for months. And then, your voice is going to change, how you talk to the camera is going to change, and also you're going to get used to yourself. Because, as humans, as animals, we're not supposed to listen to ourselves. We're not supposed to stare at each other as much as we do in this modern day and age. We're supposed to like catch a glimpse of our reflection in a lake maybe once or twice like in a year, but it's unnatural for a human to an extent. So it's something that's going to happen, and you're going to have to weather it.
yeah, and you've gone to several conventions. I saw you were at WrestleCon recently, gone to multiple different events. What has been your favorite event to go to?
That's such an impossible question. I don't know if I could tell you, because like you said, I've been to many conventions. I've been to, I think, like 200-ish wrestling shows in my my lifetime, or wrestling adjacent events, this kind of stuff. I genuinely can't pick a favorite. I can't do it.
And you've interviewed people as well. Do you have any favorite
I have, yeah.
interviews that you've done over the years so far?
Oof. I mean, I definitely have favorites. Same thing. I've interviewed over 100 people. I keep a list, and that's also a list only of the things that I've already posted. So in reality, it's more. And if you count things that, sometimes things inevitably go wrong. Sometimes you lose the audio. Sometimes something just doesn't work out. But if you count those, it's even more than that. It's probably closer to 200 at this point. And it's been a journey. It's been, like I said, over 100 people in three languages. Those people are from 20 countries all over the world. It's a crazy journey. Some of the favorite ones that I hold really close. Uh, Probably my best friends interview, because they're my favorite tag team of all time. And it's actually the only interview that they've ever filmed inside of Daly's Place, which is also a very special, venue for AEW fans. So, and in itself, the interview, I really love it. I think the way it flows, it's really fun, and sometimes gets serious, and a lot of cool things that people don't necessarily know about them or they talk about. I also really like both my Nick Nemeth interviews, because I got, lucky enough to interview him before he embarked on his independent journey and after. So it's really cool to see the difference in outlook, even though both of those interviews are pretty short. And the first one barely talks about wrestling. We mostly talk about comedy, but he did manage to drop a pipe bomb joke about Goldberg that ended up making Fightful taglines. So that was fun. Um, But yeah, I think maybe those three I would pick as my favorites.
You've also done some indie work as well as a journalist. Talk about how you got involved with that.
I think like it started fairly early into my career. It started back in Russia, and like I said, I never thought it would come to that. I never planned for it, but my local promotion, which ended up becoming my first home promotion, reached out to me because they saw that my channel was growing and they saw that, I was getting invited to podcasts and this kind of stuff, and they wanted to work together, but we didn't really know in what capacity. So that's how I got sucked into doing interviews. Never wanted to do interviews, but now it's my favorite thing to do. It's one of my absolute favorite things to do. And my first ever, like, it wasn't my first ever interview, but it was my first, like, proper sit down, well lit interview, was actually Ultramantis Black, the Chikara legend. So, fun fact, he used to go to Russia to wrestle a lot because he has friends there, and he's vegan. So there's like a community of punk vegan people around wrestling in Russia. So that's where he fit right in. And it was an insane opportunity to have as your first ever proper interview. I was crazy nervous, and I brought my best friend to help me. I brought two of my friends actually, and one of them is a wrestling person, and we met through wrestling. And at the time, he was a fan, but now he's the main commentator for that promotion back in Russia. Um, and my other friend, my best friend to this day, she's not a wrestling fan at all. Like
Mm.
I've tried to get her into it many times, and she just, she doesn't like it, which is fine. Not everyone has to like it. But she just was so clueless to anything that was going on around her, and like any kind of like wrestling etiquette as well. It's like it's an anecdote that they tell people all the time because how Ultraman is black, he wears a mask to wrestle,
Hmm.
right? And he's also a very distinctive looking dude. Like he's jacked. He has those like colorful tattoos. He has like a Christmas themed tattoo sleeve. So like a very distinctive looking guy. So we're like next to the locker room in our little nook where they set up the lights for us, and we're waiting for him to get ready for the interview. And like from the corner of my eye, I see him like taking his mask off. So my first instinct as a wrestling fan, as well as my wrestling friends, is to immediately look away. Meanwhile, my best friend is just standing there like just staring. And I was like, "Girl, look away." And she's like, "Oh, is this the guy we're interviewing?" And I was like, "Yes, the jacked guy with colorful tattoos and a gold mask on is the guy that we're interviewing." So yeah, it just kind of happened, and I'm so glad that it did because, like I said, since it's been a crazy journey in a very thorough body of work, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, once you have all that body of work, you can continue adding it and adding it and adding it, and then bam, there's just more opportunities awaiting. Where do
Yeah.
you see yourself? What's your goal, ultimate goal in professional wrestling? Where do you see yourself in the next few years?
Not to get too like dreamy or sappy, but my main goal is to make wrestling a mainstream form of entertainment, or to help make wrestling a mainstream form of entertainment. I really feel like there's no hurdle whatsoever for wrestling to become something as big as football, something as big as movies, as big as Netflix, as big as TV shows. And I would really love to work with a bigger promotion in a bigger capacity to help make that happen because like I said, I have, the education and I have the experience, and my master's degree is actually in new media. And I've just, with me making content, like I said, formally for 7 years, but really my entire life, and with me being so deeply immersed in wrestling, I feel like I've accumulated this very specific knowledge that lies in the intersection of media and wrestling. And I would really love to put it to good use and help make the world of wrestling bigger and better.
Yeah, and definitely are very outspoken and are passionate about other causes as well. Talk
Yeah.
to me about some of the stuff that you've done to help out with in your community over the years.
Yeah, one thing that I really believe in and it's really important to me is women's rights. I'm a proud feminist, and I've been this way for a long time now, for definitely over 10 years at this point. And I always feel weird about when people tell me, oh, you like it, or you're into it, or you're interested in it. I really don't view it that way. I feel like it's almost like having an optic, it's like having a lens, right? That once you snap it onto your camera that your brain is, you can't really take it off because you see the world differently. And me trying to help and trying to do something in that regard doesn't come from enjoyment necessarily. It comes from feeling like that's something that's right and feeling like that's something that I have the capacity and I have the platform to do. So I have to do it. I have to do it not in the way that like someone's forcing me, right? But in the way that I believe in it. So something that I started out with when I was very young, when I was like 20 years old, was public talks. I actually had my university in Russia help me with it and help me get spots at different conventions. So I had some public talks about rape culture, about women's rights, about like the invisibility of women in societal issues. And that's something that I've carried over to wrestling as well, because I feel like no issue in any given business, and wrestling is no exception, is just an isolated issue. I think anything that happens in wrestling is ultimately a reflection of the real world around us. So a lot of the time when something bad happens in wrestling, people are like, oh, wrestlers are horrible, or like, oh, this business is horrible. No, it's not that. It's the society, it's the people, it's the mindset, it's a cultural background, cultural context that we exist in. So I've been very spoken about women's rights and representation in wrestling as well, and not just women's, just inclusion on the whole, and that covers all intersections. We call ourselves intersectional feminists because there's different types of oppression and there's different types of social setbacks that people experience, and they intersect within each other. So, like I said, for example, like if you're a woman, you're going to have certain hardships, but if you're a Black woman, you're going to have even more hardship because those are the two intersections. So I've been, trying to platform people who can talk about their experiences, and especially people who have experienced things that I haven't as a white woman, as a cisgender woman. So I've tried to platform, trans women, women of color, to be able to talk about their struggles, and also, LGBTQ plus wrestlers. I had a show with High Spots that was called Did That Show, uh, where that was, it took a lot of work because it wasn't something that I usually would do because I like in-person things. I don't really like digital things as much because I just feel like the energy is different, but it was a product of its time. It was 2020, so it was the COVID times. So we had 3 episodes where every episode had a guest, a female wrestler on it. And in every episode, we talked about a different form of oppression that women face in wrestling. And they talked about their experience with it while I was also given a theoretical background on it. So that's something that I definitely would like to revisit in the future, but it's something that I'm proud of. So it's honestly, it's not, to me, it's not a thing in itself. It's just a lens that I view the world through. And I don't think there's barely any piece of content that I've created that doesn't have this lens on it.
And you've also donated to some organizations as well.
I have, yeah. Another cause that really like breaks my heart, honestly, whenever I hear about it is um, female genital mutilation. And it's something that blows my mind that's still a problem in our society. And I've donated some of the proceeds from my merch to organizations who combat that. I've also planned to do that with my cameo. With my cameo, I'm having complications because I'm in Spain, and apparently you can't have a cameo in Spain. So I'm trying to figure out a way to do it outside of that. But it's something that's so crazy overlooked, and it's just and even honestly, like even the name, because some people call it like female circumcision, and I'm very, very against that name because it does not at all represent what happens. Because when you say that, people who are not informed, which there's no crime in not yet being informed, hear it and go like, well, but there's male circumcision that happens all the time. I'm pretty against that too, but that's a whole different topic, right? But it's not at all that. It's an outdated practice that's specifically aimed at making women disabled, at making women submit, at making women depend on men. And there's been so many refugees who've had to deal with it and have had to have corrective surgery. So it's something that's just one of the more horrible things that happen in the world today. So I really believe in helping stop that.
Yeah, I mean, if you find something that you're really passionate about helping is just so important just because so many people are going through so much. So it's important to stand for those and fight for those rights.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like I said, it's something that you can't forget. Once you've learned, you can't unlearn. And a lot of the time in my career, I've been told to tone it down. I've been told to maybe don't ask pointed questions, maybe don't bring up this topic, maybe don't be like so outspoken about how you're a feminist, feminist this, feminist that. But it's hard at this point. It's hard to not be that.
Yeah, I mean, it's, it's horrible, what women go through and people that have been abused and neglected, and we can only want them to feel safe and feel like they're protected and they have a voice and a platform like what you're doing right now. Why do you feel passionate about giving back to your community?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know, maybe because I feel like when we're talking wrestling, right? When you say my community, I think wrestling immediately because ultimately my community is intertwined with wrestling. I barely even have any non-wrestling friends. So when I think my community, I think wrestling. And I think it's such a multifaceted question because first of all, it's me being a woman in wrestling and me having experienced all of that, and I feel for other women in the business because I know what it's like, and I want to like I haven't experienced that many terrible things, but I have experienced some pretty bad things, and I wouldn't want anyone to ever go through that again, and that's why I do that. But then, like when it comes to inclusion, it's just that I feel like the beauty of wrestling is that it is for everyone and it can be for everyone. And the more diverse it is, the better, and the more beautiful and wonderful and robust the product is going to be. And the more people are going to feel included, the more fans are going to feel included. The more people are going to feel like they do have a place in wrestling and they can train and they can become this. The more role models they have. So I feel like it's so important because if we only have like white straight dudes in wrestling, how boring is that going to be? It's just counterintuitive for anyone who's even remotely in wrestling. It's just not something that anyone would want to watch. But then when it comes to smaller promotions, for example, like I started in a small promotion that wasn't small for Russia. It's the biggest and the oldest promotion in Russia, IWF Russia, Independent Wrestling Federation. It's my first home promotion and I love it dearly. But in the scope of the world of wrestling, it's a tiny little thing. It's a tiny drop in the ocean. And that's why I wanted to spotlight the Romanian wrestling school because for me it's just incredible to see a whole new scene bud in a small country and there's nothing and like there's a group of like 20 people and that's it. That's the entire wrestling scene and that's crazy. But a lot of people look down on like indie wrestling like that. But I truly feel like that's where the heart and soul and spirit of wrestling lives. If it wasn't for those promotions, we wouldn't have AEW, we wouldn't have WWE, we wouldn't have, I don't know, TNA, because they wouldn't have the material, they wouldn't
Yeah.
have the talent, they wouldn't have the fans. Because, like I said, I didn't experience that, but a lot of Americans do. That like your dad brings you to your first indie show, and you see the bumps right in front of you. You high five the wrestler. You see the sweat, the tears, the blood, and it's just so much more personal and so much more alive than any WWE show would ever be.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's important to cultivate those. And that honestly applies to any industry, not just wrestling. If you love anything, music, theater, drag, whatever it may be, go support your local scene because that's where it flourishes and that's what uplifts it.
Exactly. Tomorrow's indie star could be tomorrow's major megastar in a huge company. So I love to hear
Absolutely.
that. Xenia, this has been wonderful getting the chance to speak with you. I want to say thank you for coming on to the show. It means a lot to me and to my viewers that are watching this on YouTube. Where can people find more about you on social media and your channels and everything?
Yes, I am youtube.com/at Xenia did that on YouTube. That's Xenia. A lot of interviews, analytics, show coverage, anything that you'd like, and a lot of interviews always coming up and scheduled to release because I'm always behind on editing. There's always a lot of fun coming out. Um, I'm also added that on every social media platform on Instagram, on X, formerly known as Twitter. And I do have my merch on Pro Wrestling Tees and on Teespring, and all those links can be found in my social media profiles. And another thing that I've recently started doing is I've started an educational program for wrestlers and promotions when it comes to media, when it comes to growing their following, establishing new streams of income. And like I said, super important for smaller promotions to grow and flourish. So if you're a wrestler watching this or a wrestling promoter, there's also links in my bio on my social media. DM me or email me or click the link and schedule a call, and let's talk about it and let's make the world of wrestling a bigger and better place.
I love that. That is so cool. I wish you all the best with that and hope it
Thank you so
grows.
much.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Xenia, and you're more than welcome to come back.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right, take care. This is Wrestling with Heart. I hope you found this podcast to be informative and entertaining. If you did, please hit the subscribe button and look out for the next edition.